Parents demanded I sign over my new apartment to my sister because she deserved it more. When he threatened to disinherit, I handed them the court documents that I never thought I'd hear those words out of my father's mouth. You have to sign over the apartment to your sister. She deserves it more than you. At first, I was convinced that I had misheard him. There was no way he could be serious. I blinked a few times, then laughed, waiting for the punchline. None came. My dad just stood there, arms folded, as if he'd just issued some divine decree. My mom, sitting on the couch with that expectant look on her face, nodded in agreement. You can't be serious, I said, still half laughing. We are, Dad replied. Rachel needs the apartment more than you do. You don't need that much space. You live alone. She's trying to make a life with Mike. It would be better if you help your sister. That's what family does. We sacrifice for each other. Sacrifice? I'd been sacrificing for her for years. Every time Rachel got into a jam, and believe me, it was a regular occurrence, I was the one who stepped in to fix it. Whether it was covering her late credit card payments, fixing her car, or paying some random medical bill, I was the one they called. Hell, I was sending my parents $1,000 a week because they were always strapped for cash. And Rachel, despite all the help, never seemed to get her life together. I took out a mortgage to buy this place. I said, you know that, right? It's not like I bought it outright. I'm still paying for it. Dad waved it off like it didn't matter. You'll get by. You got a good job. You've always been smart about money. That line hit a nerve. Yes, I had a good job, but it wasn't like I was rolling in money. The reason I had to be smart with it was because I was constantly bailing other people out, my parents and Rachel included. And now, they wanted me to just hand over my biggest investment? I'm not doing it, I said flatly. Dad's face tightened. Mom looked a little hurt, but I didn't care. I left without another word, convinced they'd realize how ridiculous they were once they cooled off. I figured maybe Rachel had talked them into this nonsense, and they'd soon grow out of it. But they didn't. A few days later, I went back to the house to get some tools I'd left in the garage. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. My dad was waiting for me in the kitchen, and my mom was standing nearby with her arms crossed. I barely had a chance to say hello before Dad started again. You gotta stop being so selfish, Tom. Rachel needs this apartment. You're being unreasonable. Here we go again. I muttered to myself. We've talked about this. Mom added, and if you don't help your sister, there will be consequences. I raised an eyebrow. Consequences? What are you talking about? Dad's voice hardened. If you refuse to do this for your sister, we'll disinherit you. You'll be cut off. We won't consider you part of this family anymore. That's when I lost it. I don't handle threats well, and this one pushed me over the edge. Are you serious? I shouted. You're threatening to disown me because I won't give my apartment to Rachel? Do you have any idea what's going on in her life? Do you know how much trouble she's in? I've been covering for her for years. She's drowning in debt, loans, credit cards, everything. I've been the one paying off her crap behind the scenes, so you wouldn't have to deal with it. They both stared at me in stunned silence. Mom stammered. What? Debts? She never told us about that. Of course she didn't. I snapped. She knew you'd go crazy. And now you're sitting here telling me she's more deserving than me? You have no idea what's going on. I paused to let it sink in. Then I decided to twist the knife a little. If you really want to know the truth, I can show you court documents. Yeah, court documents. That's how deep she's in. And Mike, the guy you think is a catch, he's trouble. Serious trouble. You have no idea who you're dealing with. They didn't say anything for a moment. My mother's expression changed to something between confusion and fear. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he finally realized he might not have the whole picture. But I wasn't done yet. They had no idea how bad things were going to get. Rachel wasn't just in debt, she was involved in something worse. Her boyfriend Mike had connections to some pretty shady people, and I'd heard whispers about money owed and illegal things that could get them both in serious trouble. I didn't say all that yet. I wanted to see how they handled the first bomb I dropped. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The fallout began almost immediately. After I left that day, I didn't hear from my parents or Rachel for about a week. It was a strange silence, almost like the calm before the storm. But I didn't want to be the one to break it. I needed them to sit with what I told them for a while. I half expected Rachel to call me, maybe to yell or try to make me feel guilty, but instead it was my dad who finally called. His voice was serious, no small talk this time. "We need to talk," he said. "Come by the house." When I got there, Rachel was already there, sitting on the couch with a sour look on her face. Mike wasn't with her, which was a little surprising, but I figured maybe she'd left him out of it for now. My mom was pacing, wringing her hands like she was preparing for some kind of family intervention. Dad stood at the kitchen table with his arms crossed like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "All right," I said, crossing my arms as well. "What's this about?" My dad cleared his throat. "We talked to Rachel, and she admitted to having some financial problems. But she says it's not as bad as you made it sound." Rachel jumped in immediately. "You're exaggerating, Tom. Yes, I've had a few late payments, but it's not like I'm drowning in debt or anything." She rolled her eyes, trying to act like it was no big deal. I grinned. "Oh, really? Just a few late payments? So you're going to sit there and tell me that you don't owe over $30,000 on 3 different credit cards? Or that you didn't default on that personal loan you took out last year?" Rachel's face froze. For a moment, it looked like she didn't know what to say. My mother's eyes widened. "30,000? She whispered. I wasn't finished. "And let's not forget the payday loans." "Oh yeah, I know about those too. You want me to get the paperwork? I got it all. You can thank me later for keeping your creditors from calling Mom and Dad directly." Rachel's jaw clenched. "I never asked you to do that." "No, you didn't." I shot back. "You just kept screwing up and hoping someone would magically fix things for you. And guess what? I was that someone until now." My parents were dead silent. Mom sat down as if the weight of it all had just hit her. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to be processing, his face darkening with every word I said. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" he finally asked Rachel. "Because I knew you'd freak out." Rachel snapped. "You always overreact. And it's not like it's all my fault. Mike and I have been going through a tough time. We've had a lot of unexpected expenses." "Mike?" I chuckled darkly. "Yeah, your knight in shining armor. You want to talk about him? Let's talk about how he dragged you into his mess. Do you even know who he owes money to?" Rachel's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on. Don't play dumb. You really think I don't know about his friends? I've heard the rumors, Rachel. He's involved with some serious people. You're in over your head." That seemed to shake her. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. My dad noticed it to Rachel. He said quietly, "What's wrong with Mike?" Rachel stammered, trying to find the right words. It's nothing. He's had some bad luck with some business deals. That's all." "Bad luck?" I snorted. "Try drug money. He owes people who don't just send reminders when payments are late. You want to keep defending him? Fine. But don't expect me to clean up the mess when it all comes crashing down." The room fell silent. Mom looked like she was about to cry, and Dad looked like he was barely holding back his anger. "Is it true?" he asked Rachel, his voice low but dangerous. Rachel didn't answer. She just stared at the ground. That was all the confirmation he needed. "Jesus Christ," Dad muttered under his breath. He shook his head and walked over to the window, staring out as if trying to take it all in. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad turned his expression hard. "You are not moving into this apartment. End of discussion. And you better start figuring out how to clean up your life. Because I'm not bailing you out either. You made this mess, Rachel." Rachel tried to argue, but he cut her off. "No, we're done. I'm done. You lied to us. You dragged us into this without telling us what was really going on. And if what Tom says about Mike is true, you're on your own." Rachel's face fell. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. You think you're so perfect, don't you? She spat. You've always been Dad's favorite, always making me look bad. Well, screw you, Tom. I don't need your help. Good, I said calmly, because you're not getting it. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed around the room. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, my mother broke the silence. What are we going to do? Dad sighed heavily. I don't know, but one thing is for sure. We're not going to let Rachel take us down with her. I didn't say anything, but I knew this was far from over. Rachel wasn't the type to go quietly. And with Mike still in the picture, things were only going to get worse. Rachel wasted no time in retaliating. Less than 48 hours after the explosion, I started getting calls from relatives, uncles, aunts, even a couple of cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. Rachel had apparently embarked on a full-blown campaign to paint me as the villain. She says you're abandoning the family. My Aunt Karen said over the phone, and that you refused to help her when she was at her lowest. Let me guess. I replied, pinching the bridge of my nose. Did she mention the $30,000 in debt she's hiding, or how I've been paying her bills for years? Aunt Karen hesitated. Well, no. She made it sound like you were just being selfish. Of course she did. I spent the next few days putting out fires and explaining the real situation to anyone who would call. Some believed me, some didn't. Rachel was good at playing the victim, and for a while it felt like half the family was on her side. The narrative she pushed was that I had more than enough and was hoarding wealth while she struggled to survive. What really pissed me off, though, was that my parents had let her do it. I assumed they'd put a stop to it after our last conversation. But when I confronted my dad about it, he just shrugged and said we didn't want to make things worse by airing her dirty laundry in front of the whole family. Well, she's already making me look like a monster. I shot back. Maybe it's time you told everyone the truth. Dad didn't have much of an answer for that. I was beginning to realize that for all their tough talk, my parents still had a soft spot for Rachel. No matter how much she screwed up, they couldn't completely turn their backs on her. Meanwhile, Rachel's situation continued to spiral downward. I heard through the grapevine that Mike had gotten into trouble with some guys he owed money to. It was the kind of debt you don't just walk away from. Rumor had it that he borrowed money to finance some shady side business that had failed, and now the people he owed were starting to put the squeeze on him. At first, I didn't think it had anything to do with me, but then I noticed something strange. One night I came home from work and saw a car parked down the street that I didn't recognize. It wasn't a neighbor's car, and it didn't move for hours. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe someone was visiting. But a few nights later, the same car was there again. This time it was parked closer, right across the street from my house. The next morning, I found a note under my windshield wiper. It was a simple warning: stay out of the family business. I stood there staring at the note for a long time. It wasn't signed, but I had a pretty good idea where it came from. Mike. It made sense. Rachel must have told him everything after our last fight, and now he was trying to intimidate me. The problem was I wasn't easily intimidated. If he thought a cryptic note would make me back down, he didn't know who he was dealing with. That night, I called my buddy Eric, who worked in private security. I explained the situation and asked for his advice. It sounds like you're being watched, he said. It could be a scare tactic, but you don't want to take any chances. I'd put some cameras around your house, and maybe keep someone on call just in case things escalate. I took his advice. Within a few days, I had security cameras covering every angle of the apartment building. I didn't tell my parents or Rachel what I was doing. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. Sure enough, the car came back. This time I got footage of the guy behind the wheel. He looked rough, scruffy beard, heavy set, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't get out of the car, but he stayed there for hours, just watching. I saved the footage and sent it to Eric. This guy looks familiar, Eric told me later. I think he's connected to one of the crews Mike might owe money to. If he's hanging around your place, that's not a good sign. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. Rachel's choices were starting to spill over into my life, and I wasn't going to let it. I decided it was time to confront her again. But this time, I wasn't going to pull any punches. A few days later, I got a phone call from my mom out of the blue. I could tell right away that something was wrong. Her voice was shaky. "Tom, can you come over? Your dad and I need to talk. It's important." It was strange to hear her sound so serious. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten more details about Rachel and Mike's situation. I agreed to go, even though I wasn't in the mood for another lecture on family sacrifice. When I arrived, I immediately noticed that my parents looked tired, worried. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. My father wasted no time in getting to the point. "Someone broke into our house last night," he said. That caught me off guard. "What? Did you call the police?" "We did," Dad said. "They didn't take anything, but whoever it was, they went through some of our stuff. It was more like they were looking for something." My mind immediately went to Mike in the car that had been watching my house. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was quickly connecting the dots. "You think this has something to do with Rachel and Mike?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "We don't know," Mom said hesitantly. "But Rachel has been acting strange lately. She came by the house earlier this week, really upset, and asked if she could store some things here. We didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" "What kind of things?" I asked. "Boxes," Dad said. "We didn't look inside, but they were heavy. She said they were just personal things from her apartment." I sighed. "You got to stop trusting her at face value. She's in deep with Mike's mess. And if someone breaks into your house, it's probably because of those boxes." I could tell this hit her hard. My parents always had a blind spot for Rachel, but this was different. There was fear in their eyes now, as if they realized for the first time how serious the situation was. "I have security cameras at my house," I told them. "A car has been parked outside watching me for days. I think Mike's debtors are trying to intimidate me and Rachel." Dad's face turned red with anger. "That son of a bitch. How the hell did we get involved in this? We need to open these boxes," I said. "Now." They didn't argue. We went down to the basement where the boxes were kept. There were 3 of them, all taped shut. I grabbed a box cutter and carefully cut open the first one. Inside were stacks of documents, most of them looking like financial records, loans, contracts, ledgers. Some had Mike's name on them. Others had names I didn't recognize. "Holy shit," I muttered. "These aren't just debts. These are records of illegal business loan sharking, maybe even drug money." My mother gasped. "Rachel brought this into our house." I opened another box and found more incriminating evidence. Wads of cash and what looked like fake IDs. Dad stood there shaking his head in disbelief. "She's in over her head with criminals," he said quietly. "And now they think we're in on it." We didn't have much time to process this before my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You're running out of time. You know where to find us. Do it or pay the price." I showed the message to my father. His expression hardened. "Enough is enough. We're going to the police." For once I agreed. But there was another surprise waiting for us. Just as we were discussing our next move, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Rachel was standing there, her face pale and drawn. She looked terrified. "Tom, I need your help," she said softly. "Help?" I said coldly. "Like the help you needed when you brought criminals into Mom and Dad's house. You've got some nerve. I didn't know it was going to get that bad." She whispered. "Mike set me up. He took off. He left me holding the bag. And now they're coming after me." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Mike had run. Of course he had. He probably saw the writing on the wall and decided to save his own skin. "You're telling me Mike just left you?" I asked. Rachel nodded, tears in her eyes. "He owed more than I realized. They want everything back. I'm scared, Tom. I don't know what to do." For the first time in a long time, I saw real fear and remorse in her face. She wasn't playing the victim anymore. She was trapped. And now so were we.